Before we get started, I just wanted to make a quick disclaimer. Everything I'm about to go over are not to be considered as hard and fast rules. There's only one rule in screenwriting, and that is to make sure that your story is not boring. When it comes to formatting and general guidelines, that's basically all it is. It's just guidelines, best practices, things that people are used to seeing. So with that being said, let's jump into it and discuss some basic formatting on screenwriting. In the previous two videos, we mentioned how a screenplay is made up of three different parts: the scene headings, the descriptions or action lines, and dialogue. In this video, we're going to talk about how to format and write dialogue. So whenever you're writing your dialogue in a screenplay, keep in mind that it's always written underneath the character that's speaking it. The dialogue section itself has three different parts to it: the character caption, the actor's direction, and the character's actual speech. So the character's name or caption is sometimes called the character cue. It's going to be in all caps and it's going to be the same throughout the entire script. If your character's name is Frank, but another character in the screenplay calls them by a nickname like Porkchop or Snoopy, then you're still going to refer to that character as Frank in the character cue. The only time you will put the character's nickname in the character cue is if every character in the screenplay refers to that character by that nickname. Below the character's name is where you'll type the actor's direction. This is always written in parentheticals. The purpose of the actor's direction gives the reader some type of clue as to the subtext or the attitude of the character. Keep in mind that you should use these sparingly. Don't overdo it. You don't want to get in the habit of telling the actors how they should be acting. The context of the description line should be clear enough that they already know what their motivation is. When it comes to the character's actual speech, this is pretty straightforward. If you're using any type of screenwriting software, then you don't need to worry about formatting. Normally, you're going to want to stay away from big blocks of text unless your character is given an actual speech, like on a forum or a panel in a scene or something like that. As you're writing your screenplay, just keep in mind that you always want to focus on showing and not telling. I said it before and I'll say it again. Screenwriting is a visual medium, so unlike novels, we're going to show as much as we can. If your characters are just telling your story instead of you actually writing it out and showing it through action, then you're doing it all wrong. At that point, it may as well just be a podcast because we don't need to see anything that they're talking about if they're just going to tell us the story. When you're creating your characters, make sure that in your screenplay, each one of them has their own unique voice. It doesn't have to be a really major difference, but there does have to be some type of subtlety and some type of way we can tell the difference between each character. When you listen to people talk in real life, nobody really talks the same. If you listen closely, there's really subtle differences between the way each person pronounces their words. Grammar, dialects, accents, all those type of things can be ways you can differentiate your characters from one another. When you're writing your dialogue in your screenplay, forget about composition, grammar, and punctuation. None of that really applies when you're writing how people actually speak. When you listen to how people talk, rarely do they use proper grammar 100% of the time. They don't always finish their thoughts. Sometimes they interrupt themselves. They may talk with an accent. They might have a lisp. They might have a bad habit of repeating themselves. There's all types of ways you can explore and be creative with the way people talk. The worst thing you can do when you're writing your dialogue is make everybody sound the same. A good way to give your characters an original voice is to give them a specific tone. Even better, you can combine different types of tone. Say for instance, your character speaks with a laid-back type of tone. You could combine that with the fact that he is naive and has a naive type of tone as well. And when you do, that may influence how you actually write your lines and what you write when you're writing your dialogue. Another example could be if a character is arrogant. And then if you wanted to combine a second tone with the way he speaks, is that he could be fearless. Or he could have a creepy type of tone that's mixed in with his arrogance. That could make for a perfect serial killer if you think about it. Let's jump back to formatting for a second. When you're writing your dialogue and one of your characters is speaking but they're off screen, you're going to type parentheses OS. Parentheses. What this means is that your character is speaking but they're not necessarily in the camera frame. We may be able to hear them, but we can't see them because they're not actually on the screen. This is another subtle way on how you can direct the camera without actually giving camera angles and direction. If your character's speaking and suddenly there's another voice that's off screen, that's a good way on how you can set up some type of anticipation or a surprise. Say for instance, a character's being called, he turns around and he gets punched in the face. Or even worse, he gets shot. These are just a couple of ideas. It doesn't have to be so violent, but keep in mind my favorite genres are crime thrillers, so hey. Similar to using the off-screen element in screenwriting, you have what is called a voiceover. This is probably the most obvious to you because you've most likely heard this in some of your favorite movies like Casino, Apocalypse Now, Avatar, Goodfellas, Fight Club, Twilight, or The Watchmen. A voiceover is basically when a character is not on screen and they're pretty much narrating the story. The way you're going to format this is you're going to type the character's name and then you're going to have parentheses, V, O, and then close parentheses. These are pretty much the basics when it comes to writing dialogue. Dialogue in screenwriting is really not anything that can be taught. It really just comes from a lot of practice and repetition. Getting things wrong and actually having people recite the dialogue, saying it yourself, seeing how it sounds coming out of your own mouth and out of an actor's mouth. And also from reading different scripts. You can read scripts from people like Tarantino, Aaron Sorkin, the Coen brothers, or David Mamet, just to name a few. I mentioned this before, but it also helps to just really become a student of listening to how different people talk. If you have some unique characters in mind and you don't really know how they should talk, try interviewing some people that you think have an interesting accent or they speak a certain type of way. Just basically record them and ask them a bunch of questions. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and stop right there. If you guys thought this video was helpful, make sure to leave me some comments, give me a like, and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Peace.